Well, good morning, everybody. When I first started making contact with the various players involved, stars of, if you like, Making a Murderer, I did send a lot of emails, most of which I didn't actually get a reply to, including the likes of Kenneth Kratz and a few other people. Both on, if you like, the guilty side and also the truther side. Obviously, people are very busy in their daily lives. But kind of recently, when I've been doing the odd tweet, occasionally I will tag, if that's the right word, Ken Kratz. And just at the start of this week, I actually sent via Twitter a couple of messages to Ken. I'll read them out and then I'll give you his response. So here goes. So my first letter to him, and I apologise, I have no fancy software, I only have my phone, so I don't have any of these fancy screen sharing technology that some of the experts at this have, such as Eric Ozee. Anyway, I'll just read it for you and hopefully it'll all make sense. So my heading was, "A wee moment of your time, please. Dear Ken, during a night out in Glasgow with my daughter, who was a journalist student back in February 2016, she asked me if I had ever heard of Manitowoc. I had not, which was quite surprising as I have been following the Packers, they are the most popular American football team in the UK, for nearly 30 years. Now, having watched Making a Murderer, I immediately contacted Sheriff Herman. Over the course of the next 6 weeks, we had well over a dozen 15 to 20 minute conversations. Our exchanges were quite frank, but nearly always friendly. In our first conversation, he brought up the fact that Netflix could have, and maybe should have, not have included the sexting scandal as it was not relevant to the case. I did not disagree with him. However, we didn't see eye to eye over the 7 searches of Stephen Avery's tiny bedroom. Now, being a member, as a lot of you know, of an ancient honourable fraternity, I do have many friends who are, or were, because they're now retired, members of law enforcement. So I therefore get irritated when members of law enforcement bring bad publicity upon themselves, as it reflects badly on both them and their colleagues. I naturally have read every article and the Wrecking Crew book by John Farrack. Here is a most interesting article, and I sent him the one, I'm sure most of you know it, it's the one that deals with the lack of photographic evidence of the bones mars the Avery investigation. So, I then went on to ask him the simple question, well, what are your thoughts on the journalists that covered the case, the local journalists that covered the case between 2005 and 2007? That was the question I posed at the end. And of course, Ken might be very busy, so I sent him a follow-up message, I think 2 days later, yesterday, yes. Hi Ken, I think that I can easily guess what your thoughts of the local press coverage of the trials. One of the journalists was, of course, Dan O'Donnell. Robert Herman suggested that I checked out his series. I seem to remember that they were called Debunking a Murderer. I had already watched and listened to them. In our next conversation, I asked him whether anyone had changed their mind after listening to Dan. He informed me that one lady who had previously signed the petition to the White House had indeed been persuaded to change her opinion. I of course congratulated him and pointed out that he only had a few million to go, but at least it was particularly pleasing that Mrs. Herman, who Robert tells me also plays the accordion, was now on his side. That's Mrs. Herman Senior, as in Robert's mum. On more than one occasion, I assured Robert that once Kathleen Zellner had completed her initial testing, that if the results came back proving that Steve and Brendan were guilty, I would be one of the first to apologise to him and his department. However, on each occasion, Robert declined to say what should happen when the results come back further proving their innocence. Perhaps you would care to give your opinion. So, here is the reply from Ken, which, you know, it just goes to show, I think if you're reasonably respectful to people and talk to them in a certain manner, you probably will get results. Shouting at them and hurling abuse at them is maybe not always the best tactic. Anyway, Ken wrote, "I'm sorry to tell you that John Farrak is not a real journalist. He was dispatched from the Appleton Post Crescent and wrote, with Ms. Zellner, the most untruthful pile of garbage I've ever read, including attacking the character of the deceased rape and murder victim to advance some shams agenda." I'll just pause there. I'm not too sure what he means by dispatched from. If he's trying to suggest that somehow John Farrak was dismissed, we all know that John moved back to Illinois, to Joliet, where he is from originally, because he got the opportunity of working in his hometown. So I'd be interested to know if there was any suggestion that John was somehow dispatched and dismissed. Anyway, Ken continues, "I fear that you are suffering from confirmation bias and only will consider versions which support your strongly held belief in this sexual sadist's release." He then carries on, "If you have a legitimate question, however, I will try to answer. So ask away. You get one question." Okay, nearly done. So my reply, "Hi Ken, many thanks for your message. You need not be afraid. I'm not suffering from confirmation bias. As I mentioned previously, when the evidence is tested, if it proves that Steve and Brendan are guilty, I will be the first to contact Manitowoc Sheriff's Office, Mark Rieger at the Calumet Sheriff's Office, and the now retired Robert Herman via Cleveland Auto Salvage, and apologise for ever questioning, doubting them. Now here in Galashiels, within the Capaldi household, Making a Murderer has piqued our interest in true crime documentaries. About a year ago, I watched an interview you gave in which you talked about the Sean Reck film, A Murder in the Park. I immediately wanted to watch it, but unfortunately it's not available on Netflix in the UK. I was therefore delighted that it was recently made available on YouTube, and it's via the Linda Kay Listening channel. If you go there, you can watch the whole of A Murder in the Park. I continued by saying, I have since watched it several times. It still beggars belief that Tony Porter was released so easily. Clearly a mistake which Wisconsin is desperate to avoid with Steve and Brendan. I thank you for your kind offer of posing a question. Can I get back to you on that, please? Now, I have a YouTube channel with just over 800 subscribers at the moment, but my great friend Eric Hosey has over 6,000 subscribers. We would be delighted if you would partake of a video chat presenting the case from your unique perspective. And hopefully you'll get back and say, yes, I'd love to take on Eric Hosey. But in the meantime, I wrote, I feel that it would be somewhat selfish of me to not share the conversation of quote, "If you could only ask one question, what would you like to ask Ken Kratz with the rest of the truther community and obtain a consensus of opinions?" So therefore, the whole point of this video is to say, if you could ask one question of Ken Kratz, what would it be? Now, I know that there's some pretty long-winded questions out there. The answer I got from the dude was about a minute long. I would suggest try and keep it fairly brief. My initial thought would be, if, well, Ken, if there was such a thing as a vial of sweat, how much DNA would there be in that vial of sweat? Mark came up with a very useful suggestion. What name are you going to call your band once Steve and Brendan are released? He suggests they might be called Band on the Run. But I'm sure that a lot of you out there will probably go for the question, how was it that when you told the jury in Stephen's case that one person and one person only was responsible, you then prosecuted Brendan Dassey? Okay, so as I say, we need to get our heads together on this. So please, as I say, if we can get a consensus of questions, then I'll send that question to him, and we'll see if we can get some further dialogue going, which is always good to get that kind of dialogue going. It might seem a bit futile at the moment, but you never know. You never know. From small acorns grow big trees, so you never know what might happen as a result of making contact. Maybe nothing. Maybe it'll open up quite a bit. Anyway, that's all I've got time for today. I've got to go and see the Aussies getting hammered again by England at the cricket, and bye for now.